And welcome everyone to the daily news analysis of 22nd of October 2023। तो आज के इम्पोर्टेंट आर्टिकल वन बाय वन देखते हैं। पहला जो है गगनयान टेस्ट फ्लाइट सक्सेसफुल, पेज नंबर 1। ए ड्रेडफुल रिटर्न फ्लाइट फॉर इंडियन पायलट ओवरसीज, आर्मीज प्रोजेक्ट उद्भव टू टैप इंडिजिनियस मिलिटरी नॉलेज, डोगरा आर्किटेक्चर गेट्स ए रिवाइवल एट J&K महाराजा गोंज, पेज नंबर 9 का ये। Butterfly makes a rare call in Himachal Pradesh. Does India need to relook the Dam Safety Act? Then, why did Supreme Court not allow same-sex marriage? Will the Sikkim flood impact Hydel project? A wake-up call. And last one is pioneer of microfinance. तो फर्स्ट वन जो है गगनयान टेस्ट फ्लाइट सक्सेसफुल। Recouping from setbacks, it simulates an abort situation to demonstrate a crew escape system. Navy recovers crew module from Bay of Bengal. The Indian Space Research Organization has successfully completed its first test flight to demonstrate a crew escape system for the Gaganyaan mission that aims at putting humans in space. After twice rescheduling the flight due to bad weather and then temporarily delaying the launch just 5 seconds before second scheduled liftoff on Saturday due to an anomaly in the system. The test cycle abort mission 1 TVD1 flight was meant to simulate an abort situation and demonstrate the system to safely carry the crew module out of the vehicle in case of emergency. Delay before launch. Though it was scheduled to lift off at 8 am on Saturday, it was rescheduled for 8:30 am when the mission director initiated the automatic launch sequence with the lift off again rescheduled for 8:45 am. However, just 5 seconds before lift off, the launch was put on hold and as the engine ignition did not happen nominally. The engine ignition has to happen in the nominal course. What has happened in the onboard computer which is doing the function has withheld the launch in view of the anomaly observed, ISRO chairman S. Somnath said. ISRO scientists and engineers at Sriharikota quickly corrected all anomalies and sprang back to launch the TVD1 at 10 am after the test vehicle lifted off from the first launch pad of Satish Dhawan Space Center. It ticked off all the boxes for ISRO to declare that the TVD1 test flight had been accomplished and the crew escape system CES had performed as intended. The Indian Navy then recovered the crew module after it touched down in the Bay of Bengal and brought it to Chennai to hand it over to the ISRO. After successful launch, the ISRO chairman announced that the first unmanned Gaganyaan vehicle mission would take place in the beginning of 2024. I am very happy to announce the successful accomplishment of the TBD-1 mission. The purpose of this mission was to demonstrate the crew escape system for the Gaganyaan program through a test vehicle demonstration in which the vehicle went up to a Mach number which is the speed of sound slightly above it and initiated and abort condition for the CES to function, Mr. Somnath said. The CES took the crew module away from the vehicle and subsequently operations of the crew module, separation of the crew escape system, all parachutes opening and touchdown at the sea at the required velocity has been very well accomplished and we have confirmation of the data for all of this, he added. Then next a dreadful return flight for the Indian pilot overseas. After nearly 15 years of flying for a global major in Southeast Asia, Biju Mathue, named to protect privacy, found himself without a job in August 2020. The airline laid off all its foreign pilots as COVID-19 brought air travel to a standstill. He decided to return to his homeland and obtain an Indian license. 3 years on, he still does not have an Indian flying permit. In July, his original employer offered him his job back. I had to swallow my pride and return, he said. He still wants to be in India where the aviation industry is expanding at almost 10% over the last decade. 2.5 times the global average. Indian pilots working for foreign carrier say they would like to be closer home. Despite a higher salary and perks aboard, the remember they remember the discrimination they felt because of their foreign nationality in the aftermath of COVID-19, but obtaining a new Indian license or renewing a loved one is too dreadful. The paperwork just to appear for the Directorate General of Civil Aviation DGCA exam can take up to a year. Many have found it easier to obtain a permit for another country and shift from countries such as Singapore to Qatar. The concerns come at a time when 970 aircraft have been ordered by the Air India and Indigo, reviving the issue of pilot shortage in the country. Air India CEO Campbell Wilson has appealed to Indian pilots globally to consider a career in the airline while also starting the recruit expert. Boeing has estimated that India will need 31,000 pilots in the next 20 years on nearly 1,500 pilots every year. When Mr. Matthew arrived in India in September 2020, he started the process to obtain a license from the DGCA. He first needed to get his class 10 and 12 mark sheet verified from the Kerala Board of Public Examination to be eligible for a computer number to appear for the exam. He appeared for two exams in November and December and cleared them. Next, instead of appearing for a telephony exam, he decided to seek a temporary conversion of his foreign license for radio skills to an Indian one, but his foreign permit to lapsed in March 2021 before he resumed the procedure towards the end of 2022. He also had to finish 20 hours of flying at a school over 3 weeks. This cost him 8 to 9 lakh rupees. Not only is it easier for an Indian pilot to work overseas, in some cases it is also much easier for a foreign pilot to work in India. Pilot point out under the Foreign Air Crew Temporary Authorization FATA, the DGCA recognizes the license and ratings issued by any country that is a member of the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization. It allows pilots of foreign nationalities to work in India for 3 months to a year. Out of the 10,000 pilots in India, 67 were foreign nationals according to government data in Parliament in March. The next Army's project Udbhav to tap indigenous military knowledge. An ambitious effort for integration of India's ancient strategic acumen into the contemporary military domain and develop an indigenous strategic vocabulary rooted in the India's philosophy and culture was launched under Project Udbhav by Defence Minister Rajnath Singh on Saturday. The project's objective is to synthesize ancient wisdom with contemporary military practices for forging a unique and holistic approach to address modern security challenges, said Lieutenant General Tarun Kumar H., Deputy Chief of the Army Staff Strategy, giving an overview strategic thinking. Project Udbhav, a collaboration between the Army and the United Services Institution of India, a defense service think tank, was launched at the first Indian Military Heritage Festival being organized by the USI. It aims to effectively integrate ancient wisdom with modern military pedagogy through interdisciplinary research workshops and leadership seminar. It will facilitate emergence of previously underexplored thoughts and theories related to strategic thinking, statecraft and warfare, foster deeper understanding and contribute to enriching military training curricula, Lieutenant General H said. Going forward, a series of events and workshops will dwell on various facets of our strategic culture and culminate in January next year with a publication to document and institutionalize such knowledge. Elaborating, he said an initiative in the research was earlier taken by the Army Training Commander, which after delving into the ancient India's treatises such as Arthashastra by Chanakya and Nitisara by Kamandaki and the Mahabharata compiled the compendium of 75 stratagems. Similarly, the College of Defence Management conducted a study to establish linkages between Indian culture and art of strategic thinking, and these will also provide valuable inputs for the project, he said. Then, ancient military system. The primary deliverable of the project Udbhav are to develop an understanding of ancient military system and indigenous strategic military culture through the study of evolution of Indian military system and strategic thoughts, educating junior military leaders and informing senior military commanders and academia about the theories, concept and teachings available in the classical text, and facilitating the creation of a knowledge pool for scholars and defense personnel for further studies, which will create an understanding of the relevance of these findings in a contemporary context, the Army said. Reports and paper prepared during various seminar, workshop and panel discussions will serve as a base for creating valuable publication for wider dissemination and further reference. The objective of the IMHF is to acquaint future thought leaders with the dynamics of comprehensive national security with special emphasis on India's strategic culture, military heritage, education, modernization of security forces, and Amrit Bharat, Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, according to the USI. Lieutenant General H said the ancient Indian knowledge system was rooted in a 5,000-year-old civilizational legacy which has attached great value to knowledge with a large body of intellectual text, world's largest collection of manuscript, thinkers and schools in so many domains of knowledge. To begin with, it is essential to understand the depth of knowledge system and philosophies. It is only then one can comprehend their enduring connect, relevance, and applicability in the modern day, he said. In this regard, the deputy chief said works such as Chanakya's Arthashastra underscored the importance of strategic alliance and diplomacy aligning with modern military practices such as international cooperation and soft power projections. Similarly, the wisdom of Thirukural, the classical Tamil text authored by Thiruvallapuram, the Tamil philosopher advocates ethical conduct in all endeavors, including warfare. This aligns with modern military codes of ethics of just war and principle of the Geneva Convention. The next, a Dogra architecture gets a revival at Jammu and Kashmir's Maharaja Gunj. A project that recreates the past glory of Srinagar's Maharaja Gunj market, which has disappeared from the site with encroachment and deviation for the several decades through new lights on rare architectural elements introduced in Kashmir by Dogra Hindu kings between 1846 and 1947. Now, Srinagar Smart City Limited and the Kashmir chapter of the Indian National Trust for Art and Culture Heritage intact have joined hands to serve vernacular element of Kashmiri architecture, including colonnaded walkways, decorative pilasters, and exposed moduled brickwork in an effort to bring that past to life again. The Maharaja Ganj market area has a rich mix of vernacular and colonial architecture. Most residential buildings lining the street are of mixed use, with shops on the ground floor and living quarters on the upper floors, constructed in the Tak or Dhaji Dewari style. Some of the houses going up 4 floors still bear testament to the rich architectural legacy of Srinagar with highly ornate exterior and interior. Sima Iqbal, principal conservation architecture with intact, told the Hindu. One of the approach roads from the beautiful 607-year-old Butshaha tomb has already been uplifted with a stubble color palette, including lime for wall and brown for the windows. A uniform traditional chapter of any station is already changing the character of the location. Shop shutters are being realigned and repainted with an appropriate color. A uniform modern signage has been designed for all the shops with a standardized typeface and size. However, the restoration is not easy considering the scale of deviation and encroachment. Most of the buildings have rusting roof seats, decaying wooden subties, and eaves boards. All these will replaced and repaired to restore a historic character. Many inappropriate interventions are being reversed. Mr. Iqbal said, located in the heart of Shahar-e-Khas, the interior of Srinagar's old city, the Maharaja Gunj market was established by the Maharaja Ranveer Singh to provide a flip-up to Kashmir state trade and commerce in the pre-1947 era. Maharaja Gunj transcended regional boundaries, attracting traders from prominent cities such as Amritsar, Lahore, Karachi, Rawalpindi, and even parts of Central Asia, who embarked on journeys to this bustling hub in their pursuit of expanding commercial prospect. Salim Beg, convener Intact Kashmir, said the Srinagar Smart City Mission's revival program is likely to throw a spotlight on the city's rich cultural heritage, including old shrines, tombs, mosques, temples, and a gurudwara. Mr. Beg said those buildings that are in structural distress will be strengthened before proceeding with any interventions. Then next, butterfly makes a rare call in Himachal. A butterfly that is rare in the Western Himalaya, the paint-brush swift, has been photographed and documented for the first time in Himachal Pradesh, Chamba district. The state is home to about 25% of the total number of butterfly species found in India. The paint-brush swift Baruis fairy, a butterfly species of the Hesperidae family, was sighted and photographed in the second week of the October during a field survey conducted under the Wild Bharatiya project initiated by the Bharatiya Forest Range of the Dalhousie Forest Division of Himachal Pradesh Forest Department in 2022. The species has never been photographed in Himachal Pradesh since its discovery in 1878. This is the first time that we have photographed and documented it. It was first described by Lepidopterist Frederick Morup more than 145 years ago from the eastern Himalayas. Sanjeev Kumar, range forest officer at the Bhattiat Forest Range, who is leading the project, told the Hindu. Since the launch of the project, the department has so far documented 120 butterfly species. We have recorded and documented various uncommon butterfly species like the anomalous Nawab, black swift-tailed jay, siren, etc., which are frequently sighted, but the paintbrush swift has been sighted and photographed for the first time in the lower hills of the Dhauladhar mountain range. We are hopeful of finding more rare butterfly species in the region in the coming days. Mr. Kumar said that the paintbrush swift habitat distribution is common in northeast, central, and south India and rare in Uttarakhand. Lubis Garlani, a butterfly expert with the forest department, detailed the paintbrush swift butterfly's characteristics. The paintbrush swift is identified based in two separated spots in the upper fairing cells. Other closely related species like the blank swift have no cell spot, while the figure of 8 swift has two conjoined cell spots. The species larvae feed on bamboo and some other grass species. Till now, there is only one record of the paintbrush swift mentioned from the Shivalik mountain range in the state, but that record is doubtful as no photographic and specimen pieces of evidence were provided in the study. This is the first time the paintbrush swift has been spotted and photographed in Himachal Pradesh. It is an encouraging indication of a flourishing biodiversity. Then next, does India need to relook the Dam Safety Act? India has almost 6,000 large dams and about 80% of them are more than 25 years old and carrying safety risk. A new Dam Safety Act DSA was passed in late 2021 on October 4 this year. A glacial lake outburst flood GLOF in North Sikkim's South Lonak Lake was one of the biggest hydropower projects in India. The Tista 3 dam at Chungtang reports have since revealed there were no early warning system, no risk assessment or preventive measures in the place as required under the Act. What are the provisions of the Act? The Dam Safety Act was tabled in Rajya Sabha in December 2021 as a response to deficient surveillance and maintenance causing dam failure related disasters. The Act listed key responsibilities and mandated that national and state level bodies be established for the implementation. It is said a national committee on dam safety would oversee dam safety policy and regulation. A national dam safety authority would be charged with implementation and resolving state level disputes. The chairman of the Central Water Commission would head dam safety protocol at the national level. A state committee on dam safety SCDS and a state dam safety organization SDSO would be set up. Sikkim formed as an SCDS on August 17 with 9 members and experts with hydrology and dam design. What do the states need to do? Provisions require states to classify dam bed on hazard risk, conduct regular inspection, create emergency action plans, institute emergency flood warning system, and undertake safety reviews and periodic risk assessment studies. Importantly, states were asked to report and record incidents of dam failures. Until now, no statutory provision required systemic reporting of failure and no single agency was tasked with tracking this data. The CWC keeps a record but the list is not updated regularly. Devendra Damel argued in a 2021 working paper for the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. In any action taken for the failure to comply with any provision of the act is punishable with imprisonment and or fines, and if such obstruction or refusal to comply with the directions results in loss of lives or imminent danger thereof, entity shall be punishable with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 2 years. For example, in February this year, the Sikkim High Court ordered the Gati Hydropower Project Company to pay 70 lakh to two widow mothers for non-compliance with the Dam Safety Act. What are the challenges? Experts say the Sikkim incident exemplifies blind spot in the both legislation and implementation. The DSA does not promote risk-based decision making and fails to intensify transparency. Himanshu Thakkar, an environmental activist and a coordinator of South Asia Network on Dams, Rivers and People, say that the frequency and scale of such disaster reveal a pattern of neglect. It keeps happening regularly. People face disastrous consequences and we call these natural disasters, but there is nothing natural about them. How dam safety undertaken? Dam safety is a function of many parts of designing and constructing dam that adhere the safety margins, maintaining and operating them for guidelines, recording data in real time in an accessible format, forecasting hazardous events, and instituting emergency plans. To name a few, Sikkim GLOF reveal poor compliance at all levels from the dam's design to the spillway capacity which controls the release of water from the reservoir. Hazard profiling and regular assessment are also mandated by the act. Hazard risk fluctuates at the slightest touch, responding to climate change, urbanization, and the way people, companies, user use water or where they were located. Periodic reviews are expected to bring forth fresh innovations, maps, and new rules curves which determine the capacity of dam reservoirs, all of which contribute towards the safety of the downstream areas. Spillway capacity and other metrics should be reviewed every 5 years or so. But Mr. Thakkar says periodic reviews are often not conducted, or if they are, their findings are not easily available in the public domain. The Act requires dam builders to conduct comprehensive dam safety evaluations, but there is no standardization of how the failure is analyzed and reported. Mr. Dample stated the Himachal Pradesh government recently served notices to 21 hydroelectric projects, finding them guilty of non-compliance with the DSA during the July-August floods. Then next, why did the Supreme Court not allow same-sex marriage? On October 17, a five-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court declined to legalize same-sex marriage, leaving it to Parliament to legislate on the subject. The bench ruled that there is no fundamental right to marry, and the court cannot intervene, though all five judges accepted that it was time to end discrimination against the same-sex couples. They failed to reach a consensus on giving queer couples to the status of a legally recognized civil union, with a majority of the three judges holding that any legal status to such a union can only be through enacted law. What did the petitioner want? The petitioner had sought a ruling by which a Special Marriage Act SMA 1954, which provides for a civil marriage for couples who cannot marry under their personal law, should be interpreted and gender neutral, thus allowing same-sex couples to marry under it. The SMA, they argued, violated Article 14, 15, 19, 21, and 25 by not allowing marriage between the same-sex gender not non-conforming LGBTQIA plus couples, and sought the words husband and wife as well as any other gender specific term to substitute by the word party or spouse. They also sought joint adoption right, nominee rights with respect to healthcare decision, preventive, remedial, protective, and punitive measures by all state governments to guarantee their safety and security, and directions to the union and state government, districts, and police authorities to provide protection to adult consenting LGBTQIA plus couples from their families. How did the top court rule? The Supreme Court said it could not issue a mandamus of Parliament. It determined the scope and effect of a certain fundamental rights, and then ruled that the Constitution does not recognize marriage as a fundamental right. The Constitution does not expressly recognize a fundamental right to marry, and institution cannot be elevated to the realm of a fundamental right based on the content accorded to it by law. However, several facets of the marital relationship are reflection of constitutional values, including the right to human dignity and the right to life and personal liberty. It is said majority opinion of Justices Ravindra Bhatta, Hima Kohil, and backed by a separate concurring judgment by the P.S. Narasimha, said that an entitlement to legal recognition of the right to union akin to marriage or civil union, or conferring legal status upon the parties to the relationship, can be only through enacted law. The minority opinion or Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud and Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul said the LGBTQIA plus community had a fundamental right to form relationship, and that the state was obligated to recognize and grant legal status to such unions so that same-sex couple could avail the marital benefits provided under the law. Queerness is a natural phenomenon, the CJI pointed out, who is the Navtej Singh Johar case has clarified. The judgment in the NALSA also explored the presence of transgender identity and other forms of queerness. The court said the consequence of the judgment on the NALSA and Navtej Johar is that the members of the queer community are no longer second class citizens. But having said that, it is stopped short of legalizing same-sex marriage. Why did the Supreme Court refuse to read down the SMA? The court felt that if the SMA was held void for excluding same-sex couple, it would mean going back to a time when two persons of the different caste and religion could not marry. Second, it is said that if were to read down or up provisions of the SMA meaning add or delete words, this would be venturing into the realm of the legislature. Whether a change should be brought into the legislative regime of the SMA is for the parliament to determine. The CJI said the court cannot either strike down the constitutional validity of SMA or read words into the SMA because of its institutional limitation. This would amount to judicial legislation. The court, in the exercise of the power of judicial review, must share clear of matters, particularly those those impinging on policy which fall in the legislative domain. He said, "Will the legislature be open to the idea?" Throughout the hearings, the government held that it was against the same-sex marriage. It had also pointed out that the judicial intervention would cause complete havoc with the delicate balance of personal laws. Activists and rights lawyers are not convinced whether the judiciary lobbying the issue back to the legislature will lead to any change. The court has said the state must take remedial action because if it regulate marriage only for heterosexual couples, it adversely impact the LGBTQIA plus community, resulting in their exclusion and denial of entitlement benefits, and that this injustice and inequity results in discrimination. It has set down a set of guidelines from setting up a committee chaired by the cabinet secretary for the purpose of defining the scope of entitlements of queer couples who are in union, to directing police stations to not harass the community. The court said the state may choose from a number of policy outcomes. They may make all the marriage and family related laws gender neutral, or they may create a separate SMA like a statute in gender neutral terms. They may pass an act creating civil unions or a domestic partnership legislation, among many other alternatives. Another consequences may be that rather than the union government, the state legislature take actions and enact law or frameworks in the absence of the central law. What is certain, however, is that the questions of the such polycentric nature, whether social or political, the court must exercise a restraint and defer to wisdom of the other branches of the state, which can undertake wide scale public consultation, consensus building, and reflect the will of the people and be in their best interest. Judge Rabindra Bhatt said. What has been the response to the verdict? The lead petitioner in the case, Supriya Chakrabarti, told the Hindu the community had been left empty-handed. The Supreme Court admitted there is a discrimination, sugar-coated our problems, but in the end gave us nothing. He said marriage is not even a fundamental right in its eyes. If there is a law like the Special Marriage Act, then being a citizen, how can you not have access to that? He asked Nadika, a trans and queer writer, researcher, and teacher, is disappointed, saying that in the case of NALSA, the Supreme Court did not raise the issue of transgender rights and asked the government to pass certain laws for the community. It felt that the court was engaging with the cause fruitfully, unlike now when it has passed the buck to the legislature. And it's a known fact that the BJP government does not care for the queer rights, Nadika pointed out. The next, will the Sikkim flood impact Hydel projects? During the early hours of October 4, a sudden surge in the Tista River washed away habitation in Sikkim. The Chungtang Dam, several bridges and part of the National Highway 10, leaving scores of people dead and missing and thousands homeless. As experts debate the reason for the collapse, including the failure of automated weather stations at two high-risk glacial lakes, South Lohanak and Sakochu. The focus is also on the status of the other dams and hydel project in the state. What triggered the flood? Experts point out that the flood in the Tista River in Sikkim and West Bengal was triggered by a phenomenon called GLOF, Glacial Lake Outburst Flood. The GLOF or GLOF is a sudden release of water from the lake fed by glacier melt that has formed at the side, in front, within, beneath, or on the surface of the glacier. In case of Sikkim floods, a satellite image reveals a large chunk of ice may have fallen from the glacier into the lake, creating waves that toppled the Muren Dam, leading to Gulf and causing severe flash flood downstream in the Tista. Anil V. Kulkarni, glaciologist and scientist at Debicha Center of Climate Change, Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, said the South Lohanaki Lake is one of the most studied lakes for the globe. According to the glaciologist, recent satellite images suggest the risk has not been eliminated despite the flood because the lake has not dewatered or de-rained substantially. Most of the lake is still intact. Earlier, based on satellite image, experts thought that the lake has dewatered, but later it was found that under ice there is water. Dr. Kulkarni said, "What is the status of the power project?" Environmentalist, scientists, and even Sikkim government point out that the collapse of Hydel Power Dam at Chungtang added the devastation. The maximum damage took place after the Chungtang Dam broke, said Sikkim Chief Minister Prem Singh Tamang. The 1200 megawatt Tista Stage 3 hydropower project located at Chungtang village in Mangan district of the North Sikkim was commissioned in February 2017, and in a little over 6 years, the dam collapsed. The Chief Minister of Sikkim raised the issue that the Central Water Commission, while approving the project, had said that it would be a concrete gravity dam, whereas the dam constructed was a rock-filled dam that would not be able to withstand huge floods. According to him, the cost of the project was increased 2.5 times from the 5,700 rupees sorry 5,700 crore rupees to 13,965,000 crore rupees. The Chungtang Dam, which has a majority stake of the state government under Sikkim Urja, has stopped generating electricity and has filed an insurance claim after the floods. Not only the Tista 3 power project, hydropower project, but all Operation Hydel power project on the Tista River in Sikkim have practically become defunct. According to the filing at the Bombay Stock Exchange, two other hydel power projects of the National Hydel Power Corporation (NHPC) affected by the floods are Tista B Power Station 510 megawatt and the proposed Tista 6 500 megawatt being executed by Lanco Tista Hydro Power Limited, a wholly owned subsidiary of the NHPC. In another BSE filing on October 18, the NHPC pointed out that the loss to the company was to 33.56 crore rupees. Electricity generation is about 1806 megawatt from the hydel power project in Sikkim has come to a halt because of the floods, according to the Chief Secretary V.B. Pathak. Along with 1200 megawatt Chungtang Tista stage 3 that was washed away by the floods, electricity generation at Tista 5 power station 510 megawatt as well as Dikchu hydroelectrical project 96 megawatt has been stalled because of smoke from the flood entering the power station. Sikkim government officials said there has been no power crisis as the center is providing grid electricity. The Sikkim government is yet to quantify extent of damage in monetary terms. The chief secretary told the Hindu that the loss due to Gulf triggered floods with the will be in thousands of crores and certainly higher than the Sikkim earthquake 2011, where the loss was estimated to be 7,425 crore rupees. What lies ahead? After the Gulf triggered Sikkim flood and the widespread loss of the lives, property, activists and scientists are calling for a rethink on proposed hydel power project. Union Minister for Power and Renewable Energy R.K. Singh, however, said the flood will not slow down India's reliance on hydropower. In response to a question by MP Asaduddin Owaisi earlier this year, Mr. Singh has informed Parliament that 87 hydro electricity project of installed capacity 22,982 megawatt are operational across the Himalayan belt. Another 30 large HEP above 25 megawatt with an installed capacity of 11,137 megawatt are being developed across the Himalayan belt. 5 projects are proposed in Sikkim on Tista and other rivers in Sikkim. The asserted hydropower potential is of 4,248 megawatt, of which about 53% 0.7%, that is 2,282 megawatt, has been in Sikkim. The asset hydropower potential is of 4,248 megawatt, of which about 53.7%, that is 2,282 megawatt, has been developed and 24.4%, 1,037 megawatt, is being constructed, according to a PIP released on March 2023. Gayatsu Lepja, General Secretary of the Affected Citizen of Tista Act, an organization campaigning against HEP on the Tista, said in the aftermath of the tragedy, the government should scrap the proposed Tista IV project and review the upcoming Tista VI project. On October 17, the Sikkim government directed the State Vigilance Police to conduct a comprehensive inquiry into any criminal irregularities in the construction of Tista 3 Dam project, submit a report and transfer the case to the CBI. Then next, a wake up call. As tension between Moscow and Washington mounts, Russia on Wednesday passed the second and third reading of a bill to revoke its ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Russian President Vladimir Putin had on October 5 urged the Duma, the lower house of the country's parliament, to make the change to mirror the position of the US. Reuters reported the CTBT seeks to ban all nuclear explosion for both military and peaceful purposes. So far, 187 countries have signed the treaty and 178 have ratified the treaty. However, it has not legally come into force. It can only do so when it has been signed and ratified by the 44 countries which are part of the treaty's Annex 2 and had formally participated in 1996 session of conference on disarmament. These countries processed nuclear power or research reactors at the time of this. North Korea, India, Pakistan have not signed the CTBT. 5 of the 44 countries, China, Egypt, Iran, Israel and US, have signed but yet to ratify the treaty. 9 countries have nuclear weapon file The remaining 35 possesses nuclear power and research reactors. The first step, the US conducted the first nuclear test on July 16, 1945 at Alamogordo in the New Mexico. Barely a month later, it dropped two atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. The devastation caused by the bombing drew attention to the nuclear armament race. The Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963, also called the Partial Test Ban Treaty, was the first international step in that direction and prohibited nuclear testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. The treaty was signed by the US, the erstwhile Soviet Union, and the UK. However, it did not extend to underground testing. Subsequently, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT) of 1968 followed as the concern about nuclear stockpiling continued, fueled by the Cold War between the US and the USSR. As the Cold War ended, the impetus for the CTBT was bolstered by the global anti-nuclear movement and the newfound international climate of cooperation. Negotiations began in the 1994 and concluded in 1996 with the adoption of the treaty text by the United Nations General Assembly. The CTBT also establishes a comprehensive verification regime to monitor and detect nuclear test explorations. This regime consists of three main components: the International Monetary System (IMS), which has more than 300 global facilities and can detect seismic shock waves through the ground, hydroacoustic sound waves in oceans, in infrasound ultra low frequency sound waves in audible to the human ear, and radioactive particles and gases from a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere signal the international data center, which receives data from the IMS network and share it with member states, and on-site inspection which will be possible once the treaty is enforced. Although the CTBT is stuck in an ongoing ratification impasse, it has had positive implications for the global nuclear non-proliferation. Ever since the treaty was opened for signatures in 1996, 10 nuclear tests have been conducted, two each by India and Pakistan, and six by North Korea. This is drastically less than the more than 2000 nuclear tests conducted globally between 1945 and 1996. Russian impact. Russia's latest action can embolden other countries to revoke their ratification, renewing the nuclear arms race. The timing of the move is crucial, as well as Russia's conventional efforts in the Ukraine war appeared to be signaling. Western powers like the US and the European Union have interpreted Mr. Putin's threats of escalation in the Ukraine to be nuclear, while Ukraine views the Russian move as stepping of its nuclear blackmail. Moscow has maintained that a change in status quo does not define an intent to carry out a nuclear test, and that it won't do so unless the US does it first. So, friends, this is all for today, and we will meet from tomorrow onwards with new news article from the Hindu newspaper. So, till then, keep reading, keep study hard. So, thank you all.